The Aba Women's Riot, a story of courage and unity. In the early morning hours of November 1929, the calm in southeastern Nigeria was shattered by the steady drumbeat of defiance. The people of Aloko, a small town in what is today Abia State, were on the edge. The tension between the British colonial rulers and the indigenous Igbo communities had reached a boiling point. However, this particular uproar was unlike previous confrontations with colonial powers. This time, it was the women of Igbo land who had risen. It was a unique and unprecedented movement, a rebellion against not only colonial oppression but also against the internal dynamics that marginalized women. The spark for the movement had come unexpectedly. The women had long endured hardships under British colonial rule, but recent developments finally drove them to act. The British administration, focused on maximizing profits from Nigeria's abundant resources, had imposed harsh taxes and strict policies that disproportionately affected the local population, especially the women. Under the Igbo traditional system, women were not usually taxed directly. They contributed economically through farming, trading, and other vital roles, but in terms of direct taxes, the men were typically the ones held accountable. When the British implemented a new warrant chief system, which allowed them to appoint local chiefs who served British interests, a tide of dissatisfaction swept across the land. These warrant chiefs, lacking legitimacy among the people, began overreaching their powers. They abused their positions by collecting bribes, enforcing unfair practices, and disregarding the traditional authority structures. But it was the rumor of direct taxation of women that ignited the spark of rebellion. As news spread that the colonial administration intended to tax women directly, anger brewed in every marketplace, village, and home. One of the women leading the resistance was Nonyeruwa, an older woman and respected figure in Aloko. One morning, a British-appointed census agent arrived at her compound, demanding information about her family's property and income, likely in preparation for new tax measures. For Nonyeruwa, this was the final straw. The encounter turned into an argument, and in her fury, Nonyeruwa chased the census agent out, declaring that women would not pay taxes, especially not under the hands of foreign rulers. News of Nonyeruwa's act of defiance quickly spread across Aloko and neighboring towns. Women gathered in groups, speaking in hushed but passionate tones. Within days, their anger had coalesced into a solid plan of action. They decided to embark on a protest like no other, one that would shake the foundations of colonial rule in southeastern Nigeria. Under the guidance of women leaders like Nonyeruwa and Ikonia, an influential figure from a nearby town, the women began to organize. They initiated a traditional practice known as sitting on a man, which was a form of collective protest among the Igbo. This ritual involved gathering outside the home or office of an offender, singing and dancing, and sometimes wielding sticks and leaves as symbols of disapproval. It was a way of holding people accountable, particularly men who abused their authority. Throughout November and December of 1929, women gathered by the thousands from villages all over the Ben district, Owerri, and Calabar provinces. The protests were carefully organized and grew in strength. More than 10,000 women participated, demonstrating remarkable unity and organization. They stormed colonial offices, blocked roads, and laid siege to buildings where British officials and warrant chiefs held power. The colonial administration was caught off guard by the intensity and scale of the protest. The women also used the symbolic power of their numbers. Dressed in traditional attire, with some brandishing palm fronds and others singing protest songs, they painted a formidable picture. They chanted slogans condemning both the taxation policy and the warrant chiefs, whom they saw as traitors serving the colonizers. As the protest spread, British officials scrambled to quell the uprising, but their response only escalated the situation. British forces attempted to disperse the women with force, using tear gas and sometimes firing into crowds. Tragically, this resulted in the deaths of more than 50 women and injuries to many others, but it only fueled the women's determination. As the protests continued, the women sent a clear message: they would not tolerate further oppression. They demanded the removal of warrant chiefs, an end to the proposed taxes, and a re-evaluation of the colonial policies affecting their communities. Their bravery caught the attention of colonial authorities all over Nigeria, with newspapers around the world covering what they called the Aba Women's War. Eventually, faced with mounting pressure and the visible resilience of the women, the British administration had no choice but to relent. In response to the Aba Women's Riot, they abandoned the proposed direct taxation of women, an incredible victory that demonstrated the power of collective resistance. The British government also investigated the abuses committed by warrant chiefs, leading to some reforms within the colonial administration. Although these changes did not dismantle colonial rule, they marked a significant concession from an otherwise rigid system of power. The Aba Women's Riot became a symbol of resistance and unity, transcending generations and inspiring future movements in Nigeria and across Africa. It underscored the significant role that women could play in the fight for justice and social reform. In an era where African women's voices were often marginalized, the Aba Women's Uprising was a bold proclamation of their agency, dignity, and refusal to accept oppression. This story illustrates the unyielding courage of the Aba women, their resilience, and their role as defenders of their communities. The 1929 movement left an indelible mark on Nigeria's history, reminding future generations of the transformative power of collective action, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The Aba Women's Riot was not just an anti-tax protest, it was a testament to the strength and resolve of African women and a foundational moment in the journey towards independence and equality in Nigeria.